Right. Hello, everyone. Today is Tuesday, February 18th, 2020, and this is the weekly meeting of Kubernetes SIG Docs. Let's start, as we always do, by welcoming new contributors. Barney is not a new contributor, but I think this is maybe the first time we've ever actually seen his face. So welcome, Barney.
Thank you.
Barney was one of our release leads for so 1.16, 1.15?
Yeah, 16.
16. Yeah, good to see you. Welcome back, Adam Kaplan. Anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? All right, let's roll. This week's PR Wrangler is Barney. And next week's PR Wrangler is Damini Satya. Damini was our release lead for 1.17. As always, approvers, make sure you know when your PR Wrangler shift is scheduled. It's a lot easier to swap shifts around ahead of time rather than during the week of. All right, let's talk about docs. Release 1.18 update. Currently, the dev.1.18 branch is broken, and that's because beneath one of the pieces of release maintenance is making sure that the dev branch for that release keeps current with the master branch, and we do that by merging master into the dev branch, and there are some very specific reasons why we do that as opposed to rebasing. But in order to do that in a healthy way, we have to apply a specific tied label to merge PRs to ensure that they don't, that commits in there don't misbehave. And beneath, the release lead opened a PR to merge master into the branch. He didn't apply the label. I approved it and didn't notice that it didn't have the label, so it broke. And now we get to fix that. So I have asked Karen Bradshaw for a sanity check on the proposed method. You can think, did I link to there is a Slack discussion about it if you're really that interested. It's in the SIG Docs channel. Where is it? I don't know if you're really that interested. Like talk to me in Slack. But basically, it broke. I'm the person who approved it, so that means that I fix it, along with the person who broke it in the first place. So many whelps left side handle it. Right, let's move on to the kept for third party and dual sourced content. Brad, is that you breathing? I'm gonna mute you. Right. So the kept for how Kubernetes docs deal with third-party and dual-sourced content. So a couple of updates on that. We've gotten some really good feedback about how to implement specific language. Tim had the genius idea of, instead of referring to bounding documentation to only be for in-tree functionality, to expand that to in-project functionality, which I think is much more robust. And that's also gotten very positive feedback. The next big update on that particular KEP is that we're on the agenda for the Open Steering Committee meeting on Monday, March 2nd. And I am happy to keep folks updated with the results of that meeting. One thing to be aware of, it's going really well at this point, so I anticipate that we could see some forward, potentially like getting this KEP approved by the end of March. I don't want to jinx anything. It's just bamboo, I'll knock on it. But it's possible that we could see approval in the near term. And when that happens, there will be large backlog of PRs related to that KEP that will suddenly come unjammed. So if you are looking for a way to contribute meaningfully, one of those ways would be to parse that backlog, and also to take a look at content that would no longer belong in the docs based on the final form of that KEP, and start opening PRs to either well, letting content owners of non-conforming content know that they have 90 days to start removing content. So basically starting to give folks 90-day warnings as soon as that KEP is approved.
Zach, on that?
Yes.
So two questions, one specific. That meeting you mentioned, is that in person or is that an online meeting?
That is an online meeting, and that is the steering committee. Let me, so in the docs agenda for this meeting, I included a link to the steering committee agenda. Let me copy that and put that into Zoom chat.
Cool, I'll open that link. And the other question I had was around the sort of the cleanup, basically. So, you know, on the assumption that this might land, I guess that there's a thing for possibly, you know, using git annotate. That's the polite form of git blame if you don't know the command, to find out, you know, how some changes landed and maybe give people proactive heads up. And is that the sort of thing you were getting at?
Yes. So I have not heard git annotate before.
Yeah, git blame.
Tell me more. Okay, I see.
Git blame without the blame.
Excellent. Yes, that is exactly the kind of work. So it's a little early yet, so I didn't plan for this level of detail, but Amy Ukasik opened an umbrella issue featuring non-conforming content. The language around that and the process around that would need to be updated. Will need to be updated when we're ready to start moving forward on it. But yes, using git annotate seems like the reasonable way to find that content and notify the relevant committers that that content needs to find a home elsewhere. I know this is a little confusing, but as actual action becomes closer, we will discuss it in more detail and have much more specific things to do and discuss in detail as approval draws near. Any other questions about the KEP before we move on? Okay, let's move on. Applying the Doxy template to the website. So I've reached out to Gearbox, the contracting studio that's doing the work, for an update. This process has been slowed down a great deal by how the CNCF has chosen to handle billing for this project. I am doing my best to speed that up, but they're working on applying the Doxy template to the blog section now. So hopefully we will have an updated preview link that includes the blog. If you're curious about what Gearbox has done so far, there is a preview link in the agenda, and it goes to a Netlify staging site where you can see the work in progress. Any questions about the Doxy template? Okay. I wanted to raise visibility on this particular issue, 19154, consistent slowness and website with static resources. Tim, do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yes, when I find my Zoom button. Okay, so let me just get that on my screen as well. Sorry about that. Yeah, I took a, that's not the right link. So I remember this issue, but I'm going to get it on my screen first.
Yeah.
So this was reported by Artistic Cheese, who's I think not a contributor, but has kindly let us know about a problem. And it looks very much like a particular kind of failure mode. My gut feeling is that it's almost definitely something is balancing between two things, and then one of those waits for 6 seconds before failing, and then another process takes over. And this only seems to affect things with cache control, max age equals 0, must revalidate on them. It looks like a Netlify thing. That's about what I know.
Okay. Thank you for boosting visibility on this. The reason why I wanted to boost this particular issue is because it's germane to a larger set of, well, to a larger pressure, I guess in SIG Docs is the best way to say that. Right now, there is a very limited number of people who have access to our Netlify configuration. Historically, that's been limited to, in SIG Docs, it's been limited to chairs, and I don't think it needs to be. There is some responsibility that comes with access to Netlify. You can, someone could do a fair amount of damage if they were to act irresponsibly with those permissions. But there's really no reason to bottleneck these permissions exclusively to the role of the chair. And so I want to raise the discussion about adding a role to leadership in SIG Docs, and specifically technical leads. Technical leads are defined in Kubernetes governance, and many other SIGs use them. And it's a way of separating out some of the administrative aspects of leadership of a SIG, and doing some of the trusted tech pieces in running the SIG. So the path to become a chair is very long, and I think folks who would make excellent candidates are rightly sort of wary about taking on the whole, taking on everything that comes with being a chair, and that folks might not be, or might be more willing to consider SIG leadership if it was limited, if the scope of that role was limited to technical leadership. So I want to raise this possibility. And Tim, that dawning horror behind your eyes is not me automatically volunteering you or coming to you first to say, would you like to be a technical lead? I think you would be eminently qualified for it, but I also think like Karen Bradshaw, Chiming Tang would also be excellent candidates to fill that role. So in order to fix this particular issue, 19154, it will need someone with Netlify access to be able to look at what's going on under the hood. I think the way that you put it in Slack, Tim, that this is a contended resource, and being able to offload some of the work and free up the bottleneck of chair attention is going to be a better solution, not just for this particular issue, but for every issue like it.
Sure. Could I say a thing?
Yeah, go.
Sure. So I'm really focusing on the issue, the technical issue, and the consequences from it, rather than the tech lead idea. But it strikes me that this is the sort of thing that, with a work hat on, sometimes we would say, well, a good way to solve that is to pay for the next support tier up, pay more money, and then ask the supplier to make the problem go away for you. The thing is that at the moment, I imagine that you have to be a chair also even to raise a support case. Is that right?
Yes, there are. There's a limited pool of people who can, who can file a support case with Netlify.
Cool. So I think that's sort of like who can file a support case, and the sort of the tech lead concept, that's going to overlap quite a lot.
Yeah. Indeed. Exactly that. You've encapsulated the point nicely. So I guess this is my call. If you are interested in being a technical lead for SIG Docs, please reach out to either myself, Jim Angel, or Caitlin Bernard. And we can talk specifically about what that means and what it doesn't mean in greater detail. Right, Doxy, cache timeout. Okay, I wanted to boost visibility also on an issue that Remy Leon raised about the .summary attribute in Hugo. So apparently it has an effect on SEO, and the means by which this attribute is populated is currently opaque. So Remy is doing some digging, but if you're interested in SEO and you also know a little bit about Hugo, I would reach out to him. Let's see. It's Remy Leon on Slack. There's a little bit of forensics and maybe a little bit of applied Hugo and applied Go involved in figuring out how that pipeline works. Right, diagrams. So is David here? I don't see David. David reached out and said that he's having trouble finding folks who can actually do the work. So until we find a contractor who can execute on creating standards for diagrams, that doesn't look like it's moving forward. Like we talked about at our quarterly review at the end of last year, there are a ton of great ideas that we could execute on, but unless someone is willing to own it and drive it, they just won't get done. So I've reached out. I have come up with nothing at the CNCF in terms of people who can recommend a graphic designer to do that work. So if you know a graphic designer, maybe reach out to David, but let me find what David's sorry, I'm just looking for all right. We put his Slack address. If you know a graphic design resource, reach out to David Gross on Kubernetes Slack. Okay. So before we get into the discussion about deepening the pool of good first issues, Adam, I am curious if you have, if there was anything that you wanted to discuss. I saw that you opened your issue from last time. Do you want to say more about that?
Nothing other than I haven't had a chance to iterate on it.
Okay.
But some of the, I could say that some of the items that are on that issue are, I guess, more straightforward, moving articles around versus actual copy editing. So if someone wants to take that as a first issue, that may not be a bad thing.
Would that be a good first issue, though?
No, maybe not.
I desperately want it to be.
I think given the challenges of making sure the redirects are there, certainly be a barrier.
But if all of the information is self-disclosing, like if all of the information that someone needs to contribute is there, then technically it qualifies as a good first issue.
Yeah, the issue as a whole is probably not a good first issue, but there are certainly sub items.
Yeah, that's fair.
There. And
this is issue number 19081. If you're, it's, not a good first issue, but you can see it from there. Okay. Let's see. Ray, is there anything that you wanted to add to the agenda?
No, nothing for me.
Okay, cool. All right, let's talk about deepening the pool of good first issues. So I think this would be a really worthwhile thing for us to do. I am realizing now that my ability to like sense a good first issue is maybe getting compromised because I've been like doing this for 3 years. So one thing that I've noticed is helpful for me is to when I look at something and say, "Oh, that's obvious, that's trivial." You know, it's easier to just do it myself than to describe it for someone else to do. That may be true, but that's not growing the pool of good first issues. So the shift that that I'm making for myself and that I would like us to talk about making collectively is to take the hit of efficiency in order to deepen our pool of good first issues and broaden our pool of contributors. Is that clear what I mean by taking the efficiency hit? Tim, you're nodding. Celeste is nodding. Caitlin, Brad. Yep. So I experience frustration around things that are not inefficient, but I don't know. Maybe you all are just pools of calm, and I alone am the rage monkey for inefficient processes. But that seems to me like the most reasonable way, or not necessarily the most, but a reasonable way to cultivate more first issues or good first issues is to take tasks that seem obvious and rather than just doing them ourselves because it's easier and faster, making them available for other people to do. So that's one suggestion. Other thoughts on how to deepen the pool of good first issues? Celeste.
Hi. I feel like the best way that I've ever seen anybody do this in the world of tech writing is having effectively a mini hackathon. And pause because we're going to adapt it. But effectively, the hackathon has two parts. First, you get a bunch of people in the room. It doesn't matter if they actually know documentation or not. Second is you go through just a section or the entire set of documentation. Kubernetes is huge. I suggest we go section by section. One person drives and shares their screen, and everybody else just yells out, "That's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong." And you just take bullet point lists. And then after that, you convert them into issues and go move section by section. And I think if we spent, say, the other half hour of these meetings every week, taking one section and just throwing like, "This is crap, this is crap, this is crap, this is crap," up onto a bullet point list, and then taking the time to convert those to issues after, we'd have a lot of first issues very, very quickly.
That's a very cool suggestion. I like that a lot.
I was so skeptical until I saw another tech writer do it for the first time. And it was like the most efficient thing I've ever seen to get people like super engaged, because everybody loves to complain.
Oh, that's just American as apple pie right there. Okay.
I've yet to meet a culture that doesn't love to complain in some way. Like the Germans love it, the British love it. I mean, the Canadians a little less so, but like we like to do it with a smile. That's like the game.
So I mean, one of the things I have as an initiative at my company is trying to increase the number of contributors to open source. It's one of my day jobs as opposed to my night job. And so if we can, using techniques like you described, if we can build a greater list of those great first items, I know, Zach was a little worried about efficiency, but yeah, if all goes well, I will have a pipeline of folks who could love having a good first issue as they even learn how to, do Git and PRs and what have you.
And they don't have to be kind of complicated. There's a lot of, even just kind of scrolling through the Kubernetes documentation as it is, there's a lot of like, the grammar in this paragraph's not great. That's a fantastic first issue. It'll teach you the processes.
That's fair.
It's fairly low effort, improves documentation quality. No harm, no foul.
Right. And the world doesn't end if somebody doesn't get to it for a few weeks. It's really great ideas.
And it exposes good grammar to a non-primary English audience. So it like makes that process visible about how grammar improvement looks. Oh, I love this idea.
Well, I'm
This is
glad. I'm
good.
glad I could help.
Very good. Other thoughts on deepening the pool?
I wonder about timing, because I am kind of minded to save up my effort to look too much at this until it is, I say, a few weeks out from KubeCon. And then, because, if there's going to be some get involved with SIG Docs sort of activity around KubeCon, a big pool of good first issues is great. And if you open them too soon, people will resolve them for you.
So what is your optimal timing?
I don't know if people are gonna say, yeah, that's what we already do, because I'm not too au fait. Oh, okay.
No, that's so we've done something like it at previous KubeCons. In 2 years ago in Copenhagen, we did at Copenhagen, and then a month later, not even a month later, like a week later, at Write the Docs in Portland. In Copenhagen, when we were converting the static site generator from Jekyll to Hugo, we looked at the conversion results, looked at it, and basically went section by section and said, this is wrong, and just like opened issues like crazy. And then a week later, Andrew Chen ran a doc sprint at Write the Docs where everyone just fixed those issues. So that kind of, it boggles the mind how effective that was at both identifying issues and then resolving them. So, but yeah, timing this around KubeCon I think does make a lot of sense. So I've got a 25-minute slot to talk at KubeCon, and I think that I can like easily turn that into I bet I could even like haggle for a 55-minute slot and just like run documentation up on the projector and just have people shout out, that's wrong.
Just tell people you're gonna give them the chance to complain. I promise you, they will.
Oh
nobody will say no.
That's
We're
excellent.
inviting you to be bitter and angry. Like it's.
But what is Zach? What is your audience that you're saying? Is this the new contributors or the active contributors that you were proposing? I'm just trying to make sure.
Sure.
So my fear is that you get in there and think that you get a whole bunch of folks that were, very passionate and giving you this is wrong, that's wrong, and that's wrong. My fear is if you hit the wrong audience, they're all just going to sit there and look at you, and you're going to be like, I got to do this for another 50 minutes.
That's fair. Let me see.
I think we're Well,
So this is, I'm looking at the thread with the organizers. This is for the contributor day, but it is not for new contributors. This is for current contributors.
so then you've got a better chance of getting folks who will hopefully have stuff to complain about.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my God, I can imagine sitting up there
Oh.
like with my Emperor Palpatine hood, just, yes, let the hate flow through you. Oh, that was good. Celeste, congratulations. Excellent. Yeah, Tim.
So, I mean, a thing that I can do locally, and I guess we can all replicate and we can suggest this more widely to people interested in the website, is I can go to my local cloud native meetup or whatever and just ask people what problems they're having with the website. Again, I think I will, because the people who are new to Kubernetes give us the best feedback.
That's
I
true.
think.
Yep.
There was a good issue logged in the last fortnight from someone who had found that the documentation didn't really explain the difference between a manifest and the configuration for kubectl, and wasn't very happy about it. And, you know, good point. I knew the difference, but...
Yeah. Right, but it's not documented. It's not documented well. And it is one of those non-obvious pieces of information that is critical, but just assumed that because it's so critical that it's obvious. And that's really bad documentation. Yeah, Tim, do you mind finding that issue and linking that to Zoom chat and maybe to
I
the
will have a
agenda
look.
as well?
I'll have a look.
Thank you. Yeah, it was Ben Elder raised it to our visibility, and he said this is a painful issue to read, and he was right. It is a painful issue to read. But yes, I think giving more opportunities to offer this kind of feedback and receive this kind of feedback contributes nicely to a good first issue pool. That particular issue, I don't know how much of a good first issue that particular issue is, but there are aspects of it that are very, very close to a good first issue. And that's maybe another thing to consider is it better to, if there's an issue for which parts would be a good first issue, does it make sense to accept those parts as separate PRs? That's such a contextual question. I don't know if that really makes sense. Thank you for the link, Tim.
Specifically about the issue that Tim just linked?
Sorry?
Was your question specific to the issue that Tim just linked?
Yes and no. Yes to this particular issue is an example of like larger kinds of issues. What was the one that we talked about earlier? Issue 19081, the issue that Adam Kaplan, who had to drop, but the one that he opened to talk about scheduling an eviction. It's not a good first issue, but you can sort of squint and see it from there. So does it make sense to try and either break out the parts that are good first issues? Do we start treating every issue like a potential umbrella issue to allow for contributions from first-time contributors? Or is that like more of a hassle than, does that create more problems instead of more solutions? All right, it's thorny, right?
I mean, I think I get what you're getting at, because I can see in Adam Kaplan's issue the step-by-steps. A lot of them are good first issues, but combine them together and add some of the complexity, and it's not really a good first issue. And like in some ways, for example, the issue that Tim just linked, it's very well defined. So it's kind of a good first issue. But you need to know what a Kubernetes manifest is quite easily. So it's maybe not a great first issue.
Yeah.
So Celeste, I'll explain. If I was going to add the good first issue label to that, my issue description would be very handholdy, and I might even add a few comments as well. And I would probably say, and if all of the above didn't make sense, let me know, and I'd subscribe to the issue, even if I wouldn't normally, because I want someone who picks that up to feel that even if they don't know what a manifest is, here's the link to tell them exactly what it is so they can go and document it and that sort of thing. So, and that's exactly what I think Zach was talking about with the pain. It takes longer than PRing the fix. But that's the sort of thing I would do.
Yeah.
It seems like there's an issue of size, I guess, is what is coming to mind for me, where there are things that would be a like solid shoe-in for being a good first issue, but they're just like they're a bit of a stretch.
Maybe good second issues.
Possibly.
I mean, I was also going to say, like, is it a question of like, and I'm just going to share personal experience here of like when I was trying to start contributing more to open source, just because I thought it was an interesting thing to do, like before my career here. I would often click into a repository, see a good first issue for documentation, and realize like there's no possible way I could accomplish this because I don't really know the software that well yet. And you would have to be somebody who is developing the software to understand it well enough to then document it, which isn't normally how somebody who writes exclusively contributes to a project. So I don't know where I'm going with this, and I'm going to stop talking.
I think, Zach, you mentioned, you and I have chatted about having like new contributor ambassadors that are like people who can help people get started. But there's always like that step, like, I don't know, a couple PRs out where it's like, I know enough to commit a PR, but I don't know enough to actually make a substantive change that I could put towards becoming an official contributor to the repo. Maybe there's something in here for that. I haven't looked at this issue in depth, so I cannot say one way or the other. And I am speaking about this perfectly conceptually, not to this specific issue in any way whatsoever.
Sure. Brad, you've got feedback.
So yeah, and I'm speaking a little more conceptually, not for the specific issue, which I haven't looked at, but for certain issues that are more of a good second issue, good third issue, what if we were able to label in the issue a mentor for the issue? So somebody who could say, make it real clear, I'm the person that if you'd like to do this, I'm the person you can specifically go to ask questions on what needs to be done. So a very targeted mentoring for those issues, because then somebody can look at it and go, even if they don't know about the ambassador program, or even worse, they get one of our weaker ambassadors like myself, who maybe doesn't know the issue, this would give better results. So if there was an issue you were passionate about, but you didn't have time to do yourself, but you say, but I'd be happy to mentor somebody, I think we would get good results from that.
Mm-hmm.
It helps build that bond and grow the number of contributors.
That's a really good idea, Brad. So Jared, remember we had new contributor ambassadors, and we had folks who were very willing to help, and who I think in the times when they did offer help were effective. But in some ways, like the model of a new contributor ambassador is a passive one. It requires the person interested in taking on an issue to reach out and say, I need help doing this. So I think the way to level that up is what Brad is describing. Like as folks open issues, I wish that Adam didn't have to drop, because this would be a great question for him with the scheduling and eviction issue, would be to say, are you willing to accept help from a first-time contributor to do some of these pieces? Like they don't have to do everything, all of the heavy lifting, but would you be willing to mentor a first-time contributor to do some of the pieces of this PR? So yeah, like having allowing folks to indicate whether they would be willing to mentor a new contributor is part of doing like a PR to an issue. I think that's a really powerful idea.
Yeah, it borrows from one of my list of sort of wonderful guidance that I give for becoming a contributor or a maintainer. One of the tricks that I've taught people is if you're really trying to break into a community, go find somebody and do work on their behalf, because then they'll be very motivated to give you advice, very motivated to review your work. So don't start out with your own issues. Start out by trying to do established committer or maintainers issues. And it's been a model that's worked very well in the past.
So what's the best way to publish that this is an option for people to do? And how do we like normalize that behavior? How do we get people to know about it? And then how do we get people to start doing it?
So I can't comment on getting to know about it, but I do think in terms of normalizing the behavior, maybe incentivize is a better word to use, which is right now kind of the membership pathway from somebody becoming kind of a random contributor to like a full member of the Kubernetes Docs community is like you must contribute X amount of things, but like maybe if somebody is writing great issues and saying, I can be the mentor on this, particularly if they're a code contributor or they are a technical person who can actually provide kind of subject matter expertise, maybe the bar is a little bit lowered. It's kind of just like it's a different criteria to evaluate somebody's participation in the community, right? Is like, how willing are you to spend your time? And I mean, the other thing that I think about is just from my perspective as like a technical writer rather than a code contributor to the community, that makes it easier for other technical writers to get involved, because that's how technical writers work. We talk to subject matter experts and then we do the writing bit. And that's something that a lot of open source projects struggle with, is like, how do we get people who have writing knowledge involved in these communities? Because it's, it's hard.
Yeah. So Tim, in Zoom chat, you made the suggestion that we, specifically, that we update the contributor guide to, let me make sure, or log an issue against the contributor guide, and to suggest that reviewers and approvers can indicate their willingness to mentor. I think that's a good idea. How would they, or how and where would they indicate that interest?
Well, I guess the PR that comes out of the issue is where we can have that discussion in detail.
Yeah, touche.
Yep.
But I think it's really, the value I think of having it in the contributor guide as well is that people, I can do a thing. And also people go, well, I'm not a reviewer yet, but apparently there are people who can do a thing. And that second bit I think is equally valuable.
Just so. Yes, so Brad, I see that you're willing to open that issue.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Let's pick this up next week, because I think we would benefit from taking some time to noodle on this, and think about really specific ways to cultivate and flag for available mentorship in specific issues, or as an approver or reviewer. This has been a really powerful discussion around this. Thank you everyone for contributing.
just real quickly, what popped in my head is just like we label something good first issue. If we had a label that said mentor available, and then you were able to say in the description of what needed to be done, so and so is willing to serve as a mentor. Those are some pretty good breadcrumbs that ideally someone could come across.
You know, I bet SIG Contrib-X would be on that, like wolves on meat. It's a
This
really
is my
good
two
idea.
for the year. Those are my 2 good ideas for the year. I'm done for the year. I'm just letting everybody know.
Add prow label mentor of be mentor available. Is there someone who would be willing to open an issue suggesting to add the mentor available label? And it would be a really good idea to open this in like the community repo would be where I would open that, because I want to make sure that this gets visibility outside of documentation.
Either way.
Brad, are you willing to open that?
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry, I saw everybody like raise their hands.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody else wants to, it's fine too. I mean, I've got mine, but I'm happy to do it if nobody else doesn't want to do it.
That was a thumbs up to the idea, and thank you, Brad.
Sure,
yes.
I'll take care of it.
Cool. Thank you very much. Brad will open issue in SIG or in SIG Contrib-X community repo. Cool. And please CC me into that issue, Brad.
You got it.
Thank you. Cool. Okay, we've got like 12 minutes left. What else would folks like to talk about? Caitlin, you want to talk about the blog at all?
Sure. So actually today is our blog meeting. I like when you ask me on blog meeting week, so I can give a shout out that if anybody's interested in joining that or learning more, we have it right after this meeting. We have 2 blog posts in the pipeline right now, one on kubectl plugins and then another one on Ingress controllers and Istio. We published one last week on OpenStack with K8s, and just to +1 that technical lead position for Netlify, we're running into a lot of issues with the blog and Netlify as well. We actually have some interest in people who want to get more involved in that, so I think that will be a really great position for us as well.
Interest for issues. Jared, in the first part of the meeting, we talked about adding technical leads to SIG Docs leadership. Like, it's a way of doing trust and responsibility with elevated privileges, and without having to take on being a chair in order to do that.
That sounds great. Total like administrative aside, but I noticed that the calendar invite isn't updated with the newest meeting doc.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. Everything else is great.
Administration, update calendar invite with latest agenda URL. Thank you.
Sweet. Thanks a lot.
Cool. Anything else to discuss? All right, let's call it. That's a SIG meeting. Thanks, everyone. This was a really good meeting today. The discussion around good first issues was awesome. Have a good week.
Thank you, Zach.